Advancements in forensic science have opened up a world of possibilities for cold case teams worldwide. Forensic genetic genealogy is one such advancement that's changed the way detectives think about crimes. Utilizing these technologies can be the final spur needed to crack these cold cases once and for all. Number 5. 37-year-old Robin Lawrence was incredibly proud of the life she had made for herself. Robin was a mother to a 2-year-old daughter named Nicole, and she and her husband, Ollie Lawrence, were excited to see what the future held for them. Those who knew Robin described her as a determined and accomplished woman who would not let anything stand in her way of success. The weekend before Thanksgiving of 1994, Ollie left for an out-of-country business trip, only to receive a shocking call. Born in 1957 to parents Jesse and Robert Warr in Syracuse, New York, Robin Warr was described as a bright and tenacious child. It was clear from an early age that Robin possessed great intelligence and was destined to succeed in life. In the mid-1970s, Robin was accepted to Carnegie Mellon College of Fine Arts, where she would later graduate. 10 years later, Robin found herself married and living in Connecticut. Unfortunately, the marriage didn't work out, and shortly after, Robin moved to Washington, D.C. In the late 1980s, Robin met the love of her life, Ollie Lawrence, and by 1989, the pair were married. The two settled down in Springfield, Virginia, and life felt perfect. In 1992, 2 became 3 with the addition of Nicole Lawrence. The pair were overjoyed at her arrival and couldn't wait to see if she would follow in her mother's genius footsteps. While Ollie's work often took him out of the state and country, Robin's position as a director of promotion at a tire and auto center in Manassas kept her close to home. In late November of 1994, Ollie kissed his wife goodbye for what would unknowingly be the last time. Ollie was bound for an out-of-country business trip and anticipated he would be back in time for the November 24th Thanksgiving holiday. On Friday, November 18th, 1994, Robin arrived at work as usual and left once the workday was done. At around 6:30 p.m., Robin relieved the nanny of her duties, telling her she wouldn't be needed until Monday. The exact timeline of what happened next remains a complete mystery. According to the Washington Post, Ollie tried calling his wife late that Friday evening, but received no reply. He assumed she'd put Nicole and herself to bed and left it at that. On Saturday, November 19th, Ollie tried to call his wife once more, but again received no answer. 1994 was a time before cell phones and text messages, and Ollie assumed his wife would pick up his call when she was free. As November 19th dragged on, an uneasy feeling began to form in the bottom of Ollie's stomach. Whilst he knew his wife would be busy with Nicole, he found it highly unusual that she'd not returned any of his calls. He decided to call around to a few of her friends to see if they had heard from or seen her. Their answers would chill him. After making several desperate phone calls, Ollie learned that nobody had seen or heard from his wife after she left work on November 18th. Again that evening, Ollie placed more frantic calls to 8600 Reseca Lane, calls that remained unanswered. By Sunday, November 20th, 1994, Ollie's concerns had grown so much that he decided to call a friend, instructing them to check on Robin. The friend did as they were asked and drove to 8600 Reseca Lane. When they opened the front door, they unknowingly stumbled across one of Fairfax's most harrowing crime scenes. When the friend entered the home, they found Robin's body lying on the floor. She had been attacked and bore several punctures and slash wounds. The friend scooped up Robin's daughter and made a beeline for the nearest phone. Within minutes, the Fairfax County Police Department had descended upon the scene. The sheer brutality of the crime shocked many seasoned investigators. Virginia was no stranger to serious crime, but something about this one rocked them. Robin and Ollie's daughter was removed unharmed, leaving investigators with a plethora of questions. Was this a personal attack against Robin, or had she been selected at random? Crime scene analysts determined that there were no signs of forced entry, nor had the perpetrator taken anything. If this had been a random crime, then whoever did this was looking to take someone's life, not their possessions. The very idea of a random attack sent chills through the Fairfax community as Robin's case hit the news. The community showed up to mourn the loss of such a well-loved and respected figure. The idea that someone within their community could be responsible for such a callous act was a horrific wake-up call to the residents of Springfield. A DNA sample was obtained from the scene during the initial investigation, and investigators were hopeful. DNA had burst onto the scene just years earlier and was touted as a way to solve all unsolved crimes. The DNA sample was run through CODIS, but no matches were found. Whoever had taken Robin's life had never committed a serious crime before, or at least they'd never been caught. The Fairfax County Police zeroed in on Ollie, which many members of the community thought was a waste of time. Ollie had been in the Bahamas the weekend Robin was slain, and therefore couldn't have been responsible. After several weeks of interrogation, the Fairfax County Police dropped the case against Ollie and began to broaden their horizons for new possibilities. While Robin and Ollie both held prestigious positions at their respective companies, neither had any enemies or any reasons why someone would target them. There were no extortion or ransom demands made, leaving investigators clueless. With little forensic evidence, the case quickly ran cold. Every year, just before Thanksgiving, Ollie held a memorial for his beloved wife and was a regular visitor to the Fairfax County Police. He checked in periodically to see if there had been any updates in his wife's case, but it remained stone cold. Decades would pass without a word, and their daughter Nicole would blossom into a young woman. Ollie ensured to keep Robin's memory alive for his daughter and now faced a world without her. In 2019, Robin's case would finally begin to gain traction. The arrest of the Golden State Killer spurred a new scientific movement within the forensic community. Genealogical DNA was the new kid on the block, and everyone hoped this new emerging technology would be the help that they so desperately needed. In 2019, the Fairfax County Police sent the DNA sample to Parabon Nanolabs, who created a phenotype snapshot. This snapshot showed what the perpetrator may have looked like at 25, down to his hair and eye color and whether he had freckles. Parabon were also able to utilize genealogical surveys to create a family tree, thanks to DNA that had been uploaded to sites like 23andMe. This led investigators to 51-year-old Stephen Smirk of New York. When approached by investigators, Stephen was extraordinarily forthcoming and agreed to submit a DNA sample for comparison. Before investigators even had time to complete the chain of custody, they received a call. It was Stephen Smirk. Smirk was calling because he wanted to confess to a heinous crime he had committed decades ago. When they arrived at the police station, Smirk admitted to taking Robin's life in 1994. The DNA sample provided by Smirk would later prove to be a match. Finally, in 2023, after 29 years, Ollie and Nicole Lawrence received the call they'd been waiting for. Robin's case had been solved and a suspect was in custody. As of October of 2023, Stephen Smirk is being held at the Fairfax County Adult Detention Center, awaiting trial. Number 4. On September 15th, road crews along I-10 near Holt in Okaloosa County, Florida, were making routine checks when they saw something in a wooded area. The crew decided to check it out, hoping that it was nothing. When the crews neared closer, they gasped in shock. What lay before them were the remains of a woman who had clearly met with foul play. The crew returned to their vehicles and flagged down the first passing officer. The Okaloosa County Sheriff responded to the incident and cordoned off the crime scene. The remains were almost wholly skeletonized, but investigators knew she'd met a horrific end based on what little they could see. Her remains were transported to the District 1 Medical Examiner's office for further analysis. In their report, the medical examiner noted that the remains belonged to a white woman aged 36 to 45, with brown blonde streaked hair, 5'3" to 5'6", and 110 to 116 pounds. She'd been found wearing a full-length floral print dress and a floral print jacket. She also was wearing a silver ring with a heart and a 4-leaf clover design, a silver charm bracelet, a black cord bracelet with beads, and a black cord necklace. The jewelry was very recognizable, and investigators believed her case would be solved within a matter of days. The Okaloosa County Sheriff's Office also created a clay bust of the woman's face, hoping that it would generate further leads. Despite the identifiable jewelry and the clay bust, nobody came forward to claim her. Her details were compared against missing person reports, but investigators would come up short. After several months of lying unclaimed, the Okaloosa County Sheriff's Office dubbed her the Okaloosa Jane Doe. Her remains were buried in an unnamed grave with only police officers in attendance. Those who were first assigned to the case had been shaken by it and spent the next 3 decades dedicating their career to uncovering the truth behind the Okaloosa Jane Doe. Answers would arrive just a year later with the arrest of Keith Jesperson, also known as the Happy Face Killer. Keith was born and raised in British Columbia, Canada, but his spree would occur just south of that in the US. Between 1990 and 1995, Jesperson is believed to have taken the lives of at least 8 women throughout the United States. Jesperson worked as a long-haul trucker, which allowed him to tour the lengths and breadths of the country looking for victims. On January 21st, 1990, Keith claimed his first victim, 23-year-old Tanya Bennett. The pair met while at a bar in Portland, Oregon, and Jesperson was able to use his psychopathic charm to convince Tanya to go home with him. It was here that Jesperson viciously attacked her before dumping her body the following day. Jesperson carried on with his life as if nothing had happened. As he hadn't been caught for taking Tanya's life, in his mind, he was given the green flag to continue. Jesperson's job worked in his favor, as he never stayed in one state for too long. For 5 years, Jesperson bounced all around the US, taking lives wherever he went. Not long into his crime spree, Jesperson began sending letters to newspapers, signing them off with a smiley face. He had also started leaving smiley face graffiti at crime scenes to let them know that it was him. In March of 1995, the police finally caught up with the smiley face killer. Up until that point, Jesperson had taken the lives of women that he had no connection to, and now he had made a fatal mistake. He had taken his girlfriend's life, 41-year-old Julia Ann Winningham, which ultimately led investigators straight back to him. Jesperson confessed to everything upon his arrest, and his reign of terror was finally over. In February of 1996, while being interviewed by the Okaloosa County Sheriff's Office, Jesperson admitted to taking the life of the Okaloosa Jane Doe. He claimed he'd picked up the woman in August of 1994, while Jesperson worked in the area. According to Jesperson, the woman's name was possibly Suzanne, Sue or Suzette, and she was a drifter. One evening, he and the woman traveled in his truck to a rest stop to spend the evening together. At some point, a security guard passed the truck, at which time Jane Doe began screaming uncontrollably. In his words, Jesperson admitted that he wasn't allowed to have anyone else in his truck with him, so he asphyxiated her. Once she was deceased, Jesperson drove to a rural wooded area along I-10, where he threw her body from the truck and drove away. Despite telling officers that the woman was called Suzette and may have been a fortune teller, Jesperson was unable to offer any further viable information. As the years went by, the case against Jesperson continued to grow, and he was eventually sentenced to serve life without parole. Efforts to uncover the identity of several of Jesperson's victims continued, including the efforts in Okaloosa County. It wouldn't be until 2022 that investigators got the break they so desperately needed. A sample of Jane Doe's DNA had been sent to Othram Inc. in Woodlands, Texas. Othram was able to sample the DNA and use forensic genetic genealogy to create a family tree and find possible relatives. One such relative was tracked down and provided a DNA sample. Incredibly, when the results returned, it was an almost 100% match. A year later, in October of 2023, the Okaloosa County Sheriff's Office held a press conference in which they identified the Okaloosa Jane Doe as 34-year-old Suzanne Kellenberg of Wisconsin. At the time of the crime, Suzanne was living as a drifter. Her family had made significant efforts to find her over the years, but it wasn't until DNA was sampled that they finally got answers. As such, Keith Jesperson, who's currently serving life in Oregon, was hit with an additional charge. Investigators have described Jesperson's almost perfect memory, as he's been able to recall his crimes, right down to the exit ramp where he dumped his victims. Suzanne's family were notified prior to the press conference, and are currently making arrangements to have her remains sent home for a proper burial. Number 3. December 2nd, 1990 would usher in a new era for the residents of McDonald County, Missouri. Up until this point, their worldview had been one of peace and harmony. Residents worked together to support each other, and while crimes did occur, they rarely showed any brutality. December 2nd changed everything, and the pressure to solve the horrific case almost proved too much for local authorities. It would take decades and advancements in forensic science for the cold case to finally be cracked. On December 2nd, 1990, a couple were walking down Oscar Talley Road, which sits between Pineville, Lanigan, and Anderson, Missouri. As the couple surveyed the long grass, they saw something off-white in the distance. Intrigued, the couple drew closer to the object that sat just outside of an abandoned farmhouse. The area itself was somewhat rural, and they were the only two people there. As they got within striking distance, their stomachs churned. In the tall grass lay a human skull. The couple immediately ran to their car and summoned the McDonald County Sheriff's Office. When the sheriff arrived, they began questioning the couple and surveying the scene. As they scoped out the area, they uncovered the remaining human skeleton scattered by the abandoned farmhouse. The remains were carefully collected and sent to the medical examiner's office for further analysis. The McDonald County Coroner's Office reported the remains likely belonged to a white woman aged between 21 and 31. She had dark brown hair with a red tinge to it, and was 5'1" to 5'4". Her dental work was significant to the coroner, who noted that she was a well-cared-for orthodontic patient with excellent occlusion tooth, indicating she likely had some wealth. The report also noted the clothing she was found wearing: a Levi denim jacket, a white t-shirt with a pocket, Lee blue jeans, and white fitness high-top tennis shoes. Forensic investigators also discovered a single blonde hair on her clothing, which they hoped held the all-important answers to their questions. Most disturbing of all was the condition in which her remains were found. While the remains were skeletal, the remnants of the binds that had constrained her remained. According to reports, she'd been bound using no less than 6 materials, including clothesline, lead ropes, nylon ropes, coaxial and telephone wire, and a parachute cord. The parachute cord was most interesting to investigators as it was only available via military issue. Investigators began searching through pools of known offenders with links to the military, but unfortunately they came up short every time. Investigators also used this time to scour missing person records, but no missing women matched the profile of their Jane Doe. The coroner would also notify the sheriff's office that the woman had been physically assaulted before she perished. The military-issued paracord struck a nerve with investigators, and it troubled them to think that an active serviceman could be responsible for such brutality. As the weeks went by, investigators concluded that the perpetrator was likely unknown to the area given the proximity to well-traversed highways. Clay busts of Jane Doe were created and circulated around McDonald County, but these failed to generate any leads. After several months had passed without so much as a single clue, the McDonald County Sheriff's Office took to calling the woman Grace Doe. Day in and day out, investigators kept working the case, hoping to come across something new. Months after Grace Doe was discovered, a new witness came forward with a troubling story. On Halloween night, October 31st, 1990, she and a group of friends had been near the abandoned farmhouse partying. At some point in the night, they collectively heard a woman scream coming from what they believed was the abandoned farmhouse. Shortly after the cries rang out in the night, the group heard a truck with a loud muffler leave the area. None of them saw the truck or were able to memorize its license plate. Investigators believed this incident was connected to Grace Doe and asked more witnesses to come forward. Whether through fear or just not knowing anything, the McDonald County Sheriff's Office received no additional calls. Updated sketches were made of the woman's remains, but these too failed to generate any substantial leads. According to reports, over 200 leads were followed to their end, none of which led to Grace Doe's identity. Eventually, other cases came to the forefront, and officers were assigned elsewhere. Over the years, different forensic experts have tried their hand at cracking the code of Grace Doe. Facial estimations were made and recirculated, but still nobody knew who she was. As DNA technologies evolved, investigators were able to submit Grace Doe's DNA profile to CODIS. At the time, this looked hopeful, and investigators waited with bated breath. Unfortunately, this DNA analysis would lead to nothing. That was until 2020, when Othram were called in to assist in the case. Othram, along with the help of students from Southeast Missouri State University, were able to extract a DNA profile and perform genealogical searches. Using this genealogical data, Othram and SMSU were able to create a family tree and narrow it down to a few possible women. Danielle Pixler of Kansas was stunned when she received a call from the McDonald County Sheriff's Office. They were inquiring about her half-sister and were also requesting a DNA sample. Danielle happily submitted to the DNA testing, and within weeks, she received another call. Shortly after, the McDonald County Sheriff's Office held a press conference in which they announced that Grace Doe was 22-year-old Shauna Beth Garber of Garnett, Kansas. Shauna had a difficult childhood, and according to her sister Danielle, she'd been in foster care before being handed over into state care. This was the last time Danielle ever saw her sister, and she'd embarked on a fierce campaign to uncover the truth. It's still unknown how Shauna ended up in Missouri or the exact date she disappeared. While her 2021 identification shocked the world, another recently developing aspect of her case would also shock the public. In August of 2023, the McDonald County Sheriff's Office announced that Dennis Rader was being looked into as a suspect in Shauna's case. Dennis Rader was active in Kansas between 1974 and 1991, and is considered one of the U.S.'s most prolific serial killers. BTK's possible involvement in Shauna's case is still being investigated, and his daughter, Carrie Rawson, has visited the McDonald County Sheriff's Office to assist in the investigation. If you have any information, you're asked to contact the McDonald County Sheriff at 417-223-4319. Number 2. Kathy Sposito was known for her wild and adventurous spirit. Hailing from Brooklyn, New York, Kathy was extremely streetwise and had experienced things most 20-somethings could only have imagined in their nightmares. Despite the environment in which she had grown up, Kathy was a kind, gentle young woman with a passion for helping others. Shortly after making a huge move to better her future, Kathy's life would come to a tragic end. In 1987, Kathy packed her bags, leaving Brooklyn for Yavapai County, Arizona. Kathy had applied and been accepted to the prestigious liberal arts college, Prescott College. Unfortunately, the subject of Kathy's degree or much more about her is unknown. Those who studied with Kathy described her as adventurous yet extraordinarily kind to everyone she met. Arizona proved to be the perfect state for Kathy, who wanted to maintain her adventurous streak. When not attending classes, Kathy would head out into the Yavapai wilderness, embarking on sometimes day-long hikes. June 13th of 1987 would prove to be another such day. On the evening of June 12th, 1987, Kathy shared what would become her last meal with friends. She was in good spirits and looking forward to the upcoming semester. At around 6 a.m., Kathy rose from her bed and pulled on her hiking gear. Within a matter of minutes, she was out the door, headed for the Thumb Butte Trail located in Prescott National Forest. Kathy was a keen outdoorsman and was considered very tough and rigid. According to reports, Kathy arrived on her beloved mountain bike in the forest at around 7 a.m. Kathy pedaled through the wilderness, eventually reaching the Thumb Butte trailhead. She parked her bike, steadied her bag, and set out for what she believed would be a short adventure. Just minutes into Kathy's hike, screams emanated from the forest. Other hikers heard this and rushed to the source of the sound, but it was too late. When they arrived, they found Kathy's body beaten and twisted. Some hikers ran back down the trail to get help, while others covered Kathy's body. When the Yavapai County Police arrived, they determined it was too late for Kathy, and she was declared deceased at the scene. Investigators determined that Kathy had suffered blunt trauma to the head and other devastating injuries. The weapon used was determined to be a rock and a wrench, making investigators believe this was a crime of opportunity. Just hours after Kathy's body had been discovered, the YCSO was called to another incident in the area. In this instance, a young woman around the same age as Kathy told investigators how she had been ambushed by a young man while walking along Thumb Butte Trail. The perpetrator had threatened the young woman with physical violence as he led her to a secluded location. Thankfully, the young woman was able to fight back, causing the man to flee into the brush. The proximity and similarity of the two cases shook investigators, and there were no doubts in their minds that they were dealing with the same man. DNA samples were lifted from Kathy and the evidence found at the scene, but there were a few issues. In 1987, DNA testing was in its infancy, having only been used in a court of law several years earlier. As a result, much of the evidence found on Kathy Sposito was contaminated. According to AZ Central, the wrench used during the attack had been handled by a fellow hiker. The hiker moved the wrench to turn it to authorities, believing they were doing the right thing. But as the sample was now contaminated, it was challenging for forensic scientists to draw a solid conclusion. 3 years later, in 1993, the Yavapai County Sheriff's Office would catch wind of another assault that bore a striking resemblance to Kathy's case. On June 2, 1993, 25-year-old Renee Sandoval was at a Prescott, Arizona post office when an unknown man ambushed her. According to Renee, she was kidnapped and forced into a car. Amazingly, the Yavapai County Sheriff's Office came across the car and pulled it over, putting a stop to the attack. Disturbingly, the man driving the car, Brian Bennett, was never charged and was allowed to walk free after kidnapping Renee, due to what investigators have called a lack of evidence. Little did the Yavapai County Sheriff's Office know that Brian's name would resurface once more decades later. Decades would pass without any update in Kathy's case, and it would eventually be assigned to the cold case unit. Developments in forensic science have allowed investigators to make significant breakthroughs using the smallest amount of evidence. A DNA profile was extracted from each crime scene and stored for later use. This later use would come in 2020, when investigators decided to use forensic genealogy in Kathy's case. DNA analysis led investigators to the Bennett brothers. While one brother had kept his nose clean, the other, Brian Bennett, had a plethora of charges against him, including physical assault. Members of Brian's family were contacted, and as a result, they consented to having his remains exhumed in order to obtain a DNA sample. This sample was compared to the profile found at the scene, and incredibly, it was a match. In August of 2023, the Yavapai County Sheriff's Office announced they'd finally closed the mysterious case of Kathy Sposito. Brian Scott Bennett had been responsible for taking her life decades earlier. Through this testing, Brian was also linked to 3 other crimes. Unfortunately, Brian passed away in 1994, leaving the victims and their families with little semblance of justice. Number 1. 39-year-old Cherryhus was regarded as a bright and vibrant woman within her community of Desert Hot Springs, California. By 1994, Cherry had gone through several trials and tribulations, but she always came out better on the other side. Cherry and her 3 children shared a home on Parma Drive, and she was noted as being a loving mother. Cherry and the children had big plans for the future, but one April evening would put a stop to those once and for all. By April of 1994, 39-year-old Cherryhus was a divorcee living with her 3 children in Desert Hot Springs. As her divorce was being finalized, Cherry began to mark out a new future for her children, and that started with a change of scenery. Cherry wanted to move somewhere quieter to give her children the best upbringing possible. Those who knew Cherry knew she devoted 100% of herself to her children and always worked in their best interests. Despite the divorce that was looming over her head, Cherry was an otherwise optimistic and happy person. But all that changed on the evening of April 23, 1994. Late that evening, Cherry left a series of panicked voicemails on her parents' home phone. According to reports in these messages, Cherry claimed that somebody had been repeatedly phoning her and hanging up. She also sounded paranoid, claiming she felt someone was taking pictures of her through a window. These distraught messages were not picked up until the following morning. Sensing the palpable fear in their daughter's voice, the Friedmans packed up their things and made the 130-plus mile drive from the San Fernando Valley to Cherry's Desert Hot Springs apartment. The 2 arrived shortly before 9 a.m. to find Cherry's home in a blanket of eerie stillness. The front door to the apartment was left unlocked and her beloved dog was roaming the streets. Cherry's mother, Ruth, would later tell investigators of the warning signs that met them when they arrived. Along with the unlocked door and roaming dog, Cherry's car was parked on the street and not in the driveway. Upon entering the apartment, a sense of dread filled them as they saw the apartment in disarray. There were signs of a struggle, and red smears painted the surfaces of the home. As the 2 moved further into the home, they made a heartbreaking discovery. On the floor lay the body of their beloved daughter. She had suffered several puncture wounds and was partially nude. Distraught, her parents fled the home and ran to the neighbor's house, shouting for them to call the police. Within minutes, the local police arrived at the scene. As officers entered the home, they collectively gasped. It was clear that Cherry had put up a fight, leading to large red smears all around the apartment. While the apartment had already been in disarray due to Cherry redecorating, investigators were able to collect key pieces of DNA evidence. During the crime scene analysis, investigators found that the perpetrator had left the red smears behind, which gave them significant hope. According to reports, Cherry had suffered several puncture wounds along with another very bizarre injury. She'd been bitten on the neck. Investigators made sure to collect the saliva from this wound in the hopes that it would help them in the future. In their report, the medical examiner noted that Cherry had likely passed away sometime between 10 p.m. on April 23rd and the early morning hours of April 24th. Thankfully, at the time of the attack, Cherry's children had been staying at their father's house and were unharmed. Cherry's family came together to mourn and remember her while the local police began the arduous task of finding her attacker. Given that 2 pieces of DNA evidence were found at the scene, investigators believed this would be an open and shut case. Cherry had fought valiantly and, in the process, had left behind valuable evidence. DNA testing of the red smears and saliva proved they belonged to an unknown male, but little was discernible aside from that. Investigators worked tirelessly in Cherry's case, and in the days after the crime, the DNA sample was uploaded to CODIS. In 1994, results from such analysis may have taken days, even weeks, and so the police waited with bated breath. Unfortunately, their hope and joy was short-lived as the results returned without a match. For 3 decades, Cherry's case would remain cold. That was until Valentine's Day of 2022, when the Riverside County Regional Cold Case Team had reached a break in the case. The Cold Case Team had been assigned to Cherry's case months earlier, and thanks to the use of forensic genetic genealogy, they had developed a potential suspect. Forensic genealogists were led to 48-year-old Sharon Eugene Gadlin, using family trees and familial DNA. Investigators obtained a warrant for a sample of Sharon's DNA, which was provided via a saliva sample. Just 4 days later, on February 18, 2022, the cold case team and DA's office confirmed the DNA found in the bite mark, and Cherry's apartment matched the DNA of Sharon Gadlin, who would have been just 19 years old in 1994. Disturbingly, Sharon had also lived just 12 miles from Cherry's apartment in Thousand Palms. By March of 2022, the warrant for Gadlin's arrest had been signed and served, and he was arrested while driving his car in Gardena, California. Following a lengthy process, Sharon Gadlin was indicted by a grand jury in August of 2023. During his arraignment, he pled not guilty. The case against Sharon is ongoing, with the DA's office opting for a grand jury indictment to help speed up the process of justice. Sharon Gadlin is next due to appear in court on November 17, 2023. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.